Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Greetings, super friends, and welcome to a very, very special video episode of the Becoming Superhuman podcast. In a moment, I am going to introduce you to none other than Dave Asprey. He's the founder of Bulletproof, one of the fastest growing coffee, supplement, nutrition, and biohacking companies in the country. But he's also the author of 2 New York Times best-selling books, and his latest book, Game Changers, is coming out on December 4th. In this wide-ranging conversation, Dave and I talk about everything from dealing with trauma to entrepreneurship to his favorite biohacks, his favorite routines, and all the things that he has learned from interviewing 450 of the world's absolute top performers. I know you are going to enjoy this episode with my super friend, Mr. Dave Asprey. Mr. Dave Asprey, welcome to the show, my friend. How are you doing today?
I am doing really, really well, and I'm super happy to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. I'm really glad we reconnected at Genius Network, and we finally got around. I know you are really, really busy right now, so I appreciate you making the time.
You know, when it's a book launch, you put
Totally
you put a lot of stuff on hold, because the idea of just if you spend thousands of hours putting together something that's worth, you thought it was worth your time, you think it's worth your audience's time, and you don't do the work to share it, then it's like you only did half the job. So I'll wake up early, I'll stay up late, I'll sit in a creaky chair, which apparently I'm doing right now, and share all the good stuff.
I love that. And I want to get so deep into that book. But first I want to, for the 3 people in the audience who haven't heard of Bulletproof and haven't heard of Dave Asprey, I've always wanted to hear how you describe what you do. It's a question we all hate, but for you, I think it's a particularly difficult question given how much you do.
Well, I sometimes say I'm a professional biohacker, or I'm a founder of Bulletproof. And sometimes I say I'm a New York Times bestselling science author, or I run a coffee company. But really, I'm one of the leading voices in human performance. And the guy who put biohacking in the dictionary, literally.
That is absolutely true. That is absolutely true. And I wanted to ask you, because you and I really bonded, I think, at Genius Network over this past life that we both share, living in Silicon Valley, working in and around technology. Were you always so passionate about human performance and biohacking, or is this something that you discovered after leaving the valley, as we call it?
I've been really passionate even in the valley, but I didn't exactly know why. And it's because I weighed 300 pounds, because I had arthritis in my knee since I was 14. And in my mid-20s, I had really serious cognitive dysfunction. And I had sinus infections all the time. And I worked out 6 times a week, an hour and a half a day. And I could not lose the weight after 18 months of doing that on a low-fat, low-calorie diet. So I had pain and exhaustion that were really big motivators, to the point that I bought disability insurance in my mid-20s. Going like, I don't really know what's going on here, but like something isn't right. What I didn't know was how much all that was affecting my cognitive performance. So when I just said, I'm going to get serious about this, my doctor said vitamin C would kill me. So I fired my doctor. He didn't know who Linus Pauling was, who won Nobel Prizes for things like that with his work on vitamin C. And I said, all right, I've got to get on top of this. I started hanging out with anti-aging nonprofit types, ended up running an anti-aging nonprofit group for almost 20 years. So I'm learning from people 3 times my age who are dealing with the stuff that I'm dealing with, high blood sugar, prediabetes, high risk of stroke and heart attack, all that stuff. I'm like, wait, there's this whole universe out there. I started taking smart drugs, ended up meeting the guy who wrote the first book on smart drugs ever, who's still a friend and advisor, Steve Folks, who's been on the show a couple times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ours as well.
Oh yeah, he's been on for you as well. Beautiful. Steve's a great human being. And
yes.
And so I go through all this, and I realized one day, now I didn't just, get rid of the problems I had, but I'm actually performing better than ever. And when I meet 88-year-old guys on my board of directors who are dating 35-year-old women in like happy, successful relationships, like, wait, everyone's breaking rules. There's a whole new level here. And then not to mention hanging out in Tibet with, advanced Tibetan lamas or meeting shamans in South America. You just realize there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, the outliers. That's the stuff I'm most interested in. If one person can do it, then we can do it as a species. And maybe that there's, just like in Silicon Valley, you find one little effect and you amplify it and you can make something happen. Well, I think we're doing the same thing for humans.
I love that. And I think it's also worth noting that you managed to be a pretty high performer before all this and were successful in your career. And I mean, I encourage anyone to check out your bio. You were a mover and shaker in Silicon Valley. What was the tipping point where you go, you know what? I'm not as passionate about software and building technology as I am building a better human.
It's really interesting. There was a time way back in the day, I was the first person to sell anything over the internet.
Right.
The word e-commerce, the word e-commerce didn't exist. And like, I also, by the way, I was working at Baskin Robbins scooping ice cream at the time. So I was, I was a big deal. Right. But I'm just trying to pay for my dorms, right? Trying to pay for my tuition in college. And I came up with this crazy idea, and you look back here, that's really cool. So I got to Silicon Valley and I said, building the internet, I see so much potential for this. It's the most important thing I could do. And I looked at all these petfood.com or pets.com and all these crazy mid-90s companies. And I said, I don't really know that there's a lot going on there, but I was pretty excited about Amazon, but they're in Seattle. So I went to the company that built a lot of the modern internet, and I was a co-founder of their consulting group. And I'm telling you, there's a thing when there's disruption happening. Bulletproof is my third disruptive company. You can feel, at least I can, I can feel the world changing, and the internet used to be like that. And at some point in the mid 2000s, it just stopped feeling like that to me. I could tell artificial intelligence, and my undergrad degree has a concentration in AI, and I see something happening there. I see stuff with Bitcoin and whatever, but in terms of changing the world, changing human biology and hacking this instead of hacking the internet, it just matters more for the future of the planet, for humanity. And frankly, if we have yet another social media tool or slightly better algorithms, it matters, but it's incremental, and I'm all about disruption. I'm going to live to at least 180 years old. I just celebrated my 25% birthday, and I'm in my mid 40s, right? Like, it's a different world that I'm living in. And the stuff you see on superhero movies and things like that, we are getting there way faster than anyone knows. And this is the cool shit. And I'm sorry, early days of the internet, that was fun, but that was mouse nuts compared to where we are now.
Totally. And the internet has really reached a diminishing marginal returns, whereas we've scratched the surface of the potential of this form, not to mention when we start cyborging out. For those listening, I want to point out this amazing spray thing that you sprayed me with as well last time we hung out. Tell us about this.
I just took a 1 milligram microdose hit of nicotine, oral nicotine. And I interviewed on Bulletproof Radio a guy I like to call Dr. Nicotine, a professor from Vanderbilt University, who 30 years ago published the first paper that said oral nicotine, not smoking, not tobacco, not dipping, not snuffing, not vaping, but oral nicotine is a treatment for Alzheimer's disease, and probably patches too. It can prevent Alzheimer's disease. So in my new book, Game Changers, check out this elegant plug. I'm going to.
I know. I love it. I love it. There's a beautiful book on the screen for those of you listening to the audio.
But in my new book, I actually write more about nicotine because it is a plant medicine, and it is one of Mother Nature's two biggest cognitive enhancing ones. The other one being caffeine. And it turns out that, yes, smoking is a disgusting habit and it's bad for you. Vaping is less disgusting, but it's also probably still bad for you. At least it's not as good for you as the other things. And for many types of brains and many types of cells, small occasional doses of oral nicotine actually mimic exercise. They reduce risk of all sorts of problems. And I use nicotine as an anti-aging smart drug, and I tell people how to do it in the book Game Changers.
I love it. And I will testify to this fact because you're like, hey, I want a spray of nicotine. And of course, me being the self-experimenter, I went for it, and it definitely gives you a buzz, a perky kind of like a cup of coffee, but this kind of physical sensation, which I thought was really interesting. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you what other stuff you do that on a daily basis. I feel like we could consume the whole podcast episode with just the hacks that you do in your daily routine. But
I mean, I take about 150 supplements a day, and I've formulated a bunch of them for Bulletproof. So I have this thing called Smart Mode, and starting in my mid 20s, there's this supplement called Cognitex, which was the first like really focused supplement with science behind it for cognitive function. And since then, there's probably 2,000 knockoffs of that kind of an idea. And the idea is, let's raise acetylcholine, which is a stimulating neurotransmitter. Even though raising acetylcholine is how insecticide works, a lot of them actually like just cause insects to twitch like that. It's because they have too much acetylcholine. And so if you go to any supplement shelf out there, there's 10 cognitive enhancers, including some of the big names from, that you'll see out there. They're all doing the same thing. And that is an avenue for enhancement for people who are low in acetylcholine. And a third of people aren't low in acetylcholine. In fact, I used to take Cognitex, and I took it for so long that what happens is you start getting jaw tension and muscle knotting from an excess of acetylcholine. And there's a whole bunch of other plant compounds that work exceptionally well for cognitive enhancement. So I formulate those because I got tired of taking 10 bottles of stuff. So the big one I make is called Smart Mode. I take that every day. We just came out with a fish roe oil. And my first book was actually on fertility. Like, how do you build superhumans for the next generation? It has to do with what you eat and don't eat 3 months before you get pregnant. And you have diminishing returns from then on down. And
once they're fully baked, it's downhill, right?
It's a lot of work to edit something that's fully baked, but I just have enough DHA, have the right micronutrients, don't have a lot of mercury and other toxins. It's amazing what happens to kids. And I just went through that whole path of saying, how do we take that stuff and just bring it forward? And what I found was these plant compounds that are not acetylcholine enhancers really make a difference. So there's about a dozen big Bulletproof supplements that have reduced the number of pills I take. I do one called Eye Armor. I do another one. Another one called Sleep Mode every night, things like that. So I'm on a bunch of supplements, and the evidence is in that supplements work. And about, every 6 months, you'll see some big media storm paid for by big pharma that says supplements don't work. Right. And then you talk to 3,000 doctors at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine who are radically changing people's lives using supplements. And am I going to ask the clinicians, or am I going to ask the pharmaceutical companies? I'm actually keynoting again this year at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And you have to be willfully blind to say that supplements don't work.
Right.
As a category. Some supplements don't work for some people because there's quality and purity and formulation issues with supplements, and different people have different biology. But you get the right supplements in the right brain, magic happens.
Mm-hmm. What's a good starting point for people who haven't experimented with supplementation? I assume most of them don't listen to the show because we talk about it practically every episode. But what's a good starting point? Where should people really start with supplementation?
Well, the real easy one, I make one that's got A, D, and K together, and those three nutrients are really important. If you take just vitamin D like we used to 15 years ago, you can actually cause increased tissue calcification because you don't have vitamin K2 with it. And vitamin D and vitamin A actually oppose each other, but you need both in order for your body to work well. So I put all three of them in one capsule so I could stop taking 3 capsules because I get tired of fistfuls of pills. You've seen me, Jonathan, a big handful of pills swallowing in one swallow. And that's an easy way to get started. It's also very affordable. Vitamin K is a little bit expensive. Everyone listening is short on magnesium, so
Right.
you really want to take magnesium. In my last book, Headstrong, where I read a lot about mitochondrial biology, I broke a study that talked about the circadian rhythm of magnesium. It turns out your highest levels are at noon. So now I take my magnesium in the morning and at night because it helps sleep. But if you have it in the morning, it's going to help your daytime energy as well.
What did you guys make a magnesium?
No, actually, we don't.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. New product idea. Which one do you like? Because I know there's bisglycinate, there's citrate, there's oxide. Some of them completely have zero bioavailability. Some of them are really well absorbed in certain tissues. What do you take?
I take as many different forms as I can get. So I think I have 8 different forms. If it ends in an 8, you probably want to take it. And
Hmm.
the reason for that is that when you look at something like the Krebs cycle, which is how your mitochondria make ATP, there's different forms of it that you might be deficient in. So I look at sort of the broad spectrum approach to magnesium instead of just one form. One form that stands out is 3 and 8, and I do use magnesium 3 and 8 as and I believe Smart Mode has some of that in there if memory serves, but not a gram a day kind of dose. And that stuff specifically goes into the brain, according to studies in Japan. So the idea here is we get our basics met, and just if you were to do those couple of supplements and you've never taken any supplements before, you're probably going to like your life. And then there's 2 other things that are kind of supplements, at least. Well, one of them is labeled as a supplement anyway. It's brain octane oil. Like you want to change your life. We make these little packets, like ketchup packets. Just put a bunch of those in your bag when you travel and have a
Mhm.
bottle of it on your counter. Every time you eat or make your Bulletproof coffee, just put some in there. And everything changes. It actually takes a couple of years for your metabolism to really shift into being able to easily burn fat. But if you always have ketones present because brain octane is in your food and it converts into ketones, your cravings can go down on the first day. You feel very different, and it's different than MCT oil. I mean, there's all kinds of people coming out with MCT oils who just haven't done the research. That, for instance, lauric acid, the cheapest and most abundant MCT oil, doesn't raise ketones any more than corn oil. But brain octane, which is one of the 4 kinds of MCT oil, raises it 4 times better than coconut oil. It's the highest ketogenic oil like that, and it has no flavor. So I've used that reliably for years and kind of put that on the market anytime someone out there says,
I've watched you use it like someone else would use, I guess, ketchup, just
yeah,
on
I
everything.
pour it on my sushi. If I'm going to be eating anything, I generally have a little bit in there, and it's a part of the Bulletproof collagen bars. And that's the other big thing I'd recommend as a supplement. Uh, Given that I had arthritis in my knee since I was 14, I've had 3 knee surgeries. I discovered how important collagen was in Tibet on the same trip where I had yak butter tea. That was the inspiration for Bulletproof coffee. I wrecked my knees descending 7,500 feet, vertical feet, in Nepal. And my cartilage was so bruised, I could not walk across the street to get food. Even with 2 trekking poles, I was like 100 years old. And I really wanted to trek in Mount Kailash, and I had 5 days of sitting on a bus from Kathmandu to Lhasa. And I got stopped at this little tiny mud wall restaurant and asked the Chinese guy who I was riding with, like, hey, can you read this menu to me? Because I don't read Chinese. And I picked out the highest collagen food there was. It was pig's ears. And I had this bowl of like 20 cold boiled pig's ears. It was the most horrible meal I've ever had. I was dipping them in hot soup and just chewing on them. And the next day I could walk. I mean, it was such a big deal to have those building blocks to make collagen. And I tried blending pig's ears into my Bulletproof. No, I didn't. But how do you do that?
Food
So
scientists just wouldn't go for it for some
yeah.
reason.
So Bulletproof put collagen out there as a anti-aging and a performance supplement for humans. So there's a bunch of collagen out there right now, but it turns out there's about 1,000 different ways to make it. And when you make it from grass-fed animals and you make it with the right peptide size with di and tripeptides and things like that, it's all about the same as brain octane. You can make a coconut oil or an MCT oil, but it's not the same. And you can buy collagen for dirt cheap, but it tastes like socks. Like, how do you make it taste good and have the right thing? So part of that details of formulation. and understanding how it works so that it gets into the body so that it tastes good. And that's why right now the Bulletproof collagen bar is the #1 selling bar at Whole Foods. And you get your brain octane and you get your collagen in the same thing. That's not technically a supplement, but it's also got some prebiotics in it. So I'm like, do I eat one of those a day? Usually.
It can't hurt.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, because you are a library of health information, and we've talked a little bit, you and I, about memory hacks and stuff like that. How do you learn? Because, I know your wife's a physician, but she has her own world going on. You're a technologist. How do you learn so much so fast?
Oh man, I'm definitely gonna have to refer you to Game Changers because I talk about this, and I'll give you a more specific answer. But I asked almost 500 people, Nobel Prize winners and Navy SEALs, and just a whole host of characters, that question about human performance on Bulletproof Radio. Top 3 things that you'd recommend for someone who wants to perform better at everything they do as a human being. And then I statistically analyzed the data, and there's 3 big buckets that the world's top performing people focus on: smarter, faster, and happier. And they find ways to make that happen. So what you're asking there is actually both smarter and faster. And this boiled down, this isn't just what I think, this is what the data showed, and it's illustrated by stories about how I do stuff and how other big winners do things, but very different from this person did it, so you should do it. More, this is a priority for a lot of these people. Should this be your priority? If so, here's some tools that might work. But we only have so much time in the day. We're not all going to do everything every successful person ever did. So how do you prioritize what you're going to do first, second, third, and build that into a program? So on the smarter side of things, I do have some knowledge from Jim Quick in the book, who's
Okay.
Has he been on your show?
Not yet.
Okay. I'd be happy to introduce you. Jim's a dear friend, and he runs Quick Learning, and he's taught the CEOs of many Fortune 100 companies and like all of the X-Men actors how to memorize their lines faster, and is one of the top guys here. But for certain kinds of learning, those techniques work really well. Here's what I did, Jonathan, and this isn't something that's easy to replicate. When I was in Silicon Valley, I was all in on making this new internet thing that didn't exist. The first shipping pay-as-you-go provision on demand cloud computing service was my baby. I have the poster for it over there, way before Amazon Web Services was out the door. Just incredibly cool stuff. And I ran the program at the University of California to teach engineers in Silicon Valley how to build the internet. So every night or every day I would work all day. And I was, the company that held Google's first servers. I was a co-founder of their consulting group. So it was really intense, big deals, like architecting the future. And then I would go eat, and I'd eat like this Euro sandwich, with lots of lamb in it. And unfortunately some MSG and gluten that probably didn't help me very much. And during that time, I would read the trade journals, like the actual, industry magazines about the very latest tech. And then I would drive down the street to the University of California, and I would teach a 3-hour class on what I just read. I did this 3-4 nights a week for 5 years. And the ability to take a really complex topic, stuff it into my head, build a picture well enough that I could teach it, is a learned skill through practice. And I just interviewed Eric Kandel, the guy who discovered neuroplasticities in his 90s and won a Nobel Prize for it. And I asked him maybe 10 times, how do I learn faster? How do I learn faster? And all he would ever say was practice, practice, practice. It's a fantastic interview, fantastic human being. I love talking with him. But I think what happened here was that. So my knowledge of biohacking, of anti-aging, of longevity, all these things, it's because I draw a picture of everything in my head. I don't use a memory palace, but I have a working picture that's linked like the internet's linked. It is not a normal cognitive function.
No, but that's what we teach in our programs. It's what Jim teaches.
Yeah.
You've clearly discovered, you've tapped into your innate eidetic memory. And then the other thing that you said is another thing that comes up in our programs a lot, which is the power of teaching, right? Like Richard Feynman classically taught this, like if you have to teach it, you're going to learn a lot better. And I imagine, what you're doing right now on the show is taking stuff that you've learned about biohacking, about liquid nicotine, and teaching that stuff. So all day that wheel is turning.
It is turning. There's another thing that Feynman also did, and something that I do. There's only two ways I know to really lock knowledge in. One of them, like I said, is to teach it. The other is to write a book about it. And
Totally.
that's why I wrote Game Changers. That's why I wrote all these books. Game Changers was okay. I fixed my body. Like I got the Bulletproof diet down. I lost the weight. I'm today around 10.3% body fat. I vary between like 9.6 and 10.3. That percentage change, by the way, that's changes in water weight. So I'm carrying about 20 pounds, either between 19.7 and 20.6 pounds of fat on my entire body. And I used to weigh 300 pounds, and I was a 46-inch waist, and I'm a 33-inch waist. Like, this is awesome stuff. So I go through and I solve that problem with Bulletproof, and it's 500,000 copies. Lots of people are doing that with the Bulletproof diet. And then I said, all right, how do I really dial in more on the brain? And that came down to mitochondrial biology, because that's what's missing from cognitive enhancement. And that's what I do in Keto Prime, which is another big supplement that just changes people's brains. And we do that with Neuromaster, one that raises brain-derived nootropic factor. So I formulated all these things. Now I've got that dialed in, and wrote the book so I could dial it in. And then, okay, my brain works. I have more energy, and I'm smarter than I was when I was 25. My body works. I don't have pain all the time. Like, this is legit. What am I going to do with all this energy? So you take 4 years of interviews with hundreds of top performing people. You ask them that one question, but if you don't go through and boil it down to get the data to figure out what do they do in common, because it's bewildering to try and copy what 500 people do. It doesn't work. That approach doesn't work. But what do they all agree on? And the number one thing all these smart people said, including people who had nothing to do with medicine and nutrition and things like that, 76% of people put food as one of the top three things. Everyone who kicks ass has learned, if you eat garbage, you perform like garbage. That's just how it works. And I've interviewed raw vegans. Like, I used to be a raw vegan before it made me really sick. And I've interviewed all kinds of different philosophies, but here's the deal. If you're not prioritizing food in your performance stack, you're simply doing it wrong, and you're probably not going to achieve at the levels you're capable of.
Yeah.
But this isn't a book about food. Game Changers has the law about food is let's see, eat like your grandma, not a caveman. And the point of that law in the book is, you know what? If you look at what your mother's mother's mother probably ate, there's some wisdom for you, because what works for one person doesn't work for the next person. There are basic rules that are in the Bulletproof diet that generally work for the vast majority of people, but the diet itself is tunable in the middle, because lentils may trash you. In fact, they trash a lot of people. But I'm telling you, if your ancestors ate lentils for thousands of years on your mother's side, you probably handle them better than average. And what's going on here that no one talks about is we have nuclear DNA. And this is the stuff inside our cells that's, the blueprint for your meat. But no one talks about this other thing called mitochondrial DNA. And that's the blueprint for your wiring diagram. So if you imagine, if your people evolved, you say on the savannah in Africa, okay, your physical building blocks, your meat and your wiring diagram, your power plant, they're perfectly matched and adapted to your environment. But then if you mix and match, and by the way, we're all mixed and matched. Like, there's no one who does 23andMe and they're like, oh, I'm 100%, Northern European or, Southeast Asian from this one tribe. It's gone, right? But what we have is a mismatch between nuclear and mitochondrial DNA. But if you look at what the DNA in mitochondria like, it always comes from your mom. So there's something to be said about just look back through your people, try those foods and see which ones work. You still have to run the experiments. You still have to do the 2-week elimination stuff that's in the Bulletproof diet. But just know it's not the same for everyone. If your wife likes this and you don't like this, it might be because you just have weird tastes, or it could be because this isn't compatible with you, and it's okay. And so the big rule there was the quality of what you eat matters. And if you look at how you feel after you eat, it matters. So you don't have to follow my recommendations. My recommendations are my last 2 books. They're not in this book for food, but it's to say, in your set of priorities, if you have a problem with what you eat, you got to find out, is it an emotional thing? That's another rule in here. A lot of these people figured out, when are they making decisions with old trauma and emotions versus when are they making decisions using their rational brain? And that was really important to call that out. And I had a couple guests on the show talk about that in great detail, men and women, just saying, look, I had an emotional problem with food. So all those things are in here. So how do you know where to start? For me, I wanted to know, how do I get another ounce of energy out of my day? How do I get more engagement? How do I get more flow state? How do I get less downtime?
I love that. And I can definitely feel what you're saying after interviewing, albeit not 450, but 250 top performers. Themes really start to come out, and they're the same themes over and over and over. And I look at health now. It used to be a tripod until I talked to a lot of folks like yourself who mentioned the fourth thing, which is emotional health. But it really comes down to sleep, exercise, and nutrition. It's really that basic, dialing those four things in, and everything else is on top of that.
Well, it's weird because if you get those things, then you have the energy and the willpower to actually do the hard work, which is deal with trauma. We've heard this at Genius Network a lot. Craig Handley, another friend of ours from Genius Network, runs a sizable call center operation, and he did the 40 Years of Zen neurofeedback training program and posted about it on Facebook and all this stuff. So I know he's okay with me talking about it. But he said, I just realized that all the stuff I'm doing as an entrepreneur came about from being bullied in 7th grade. And the number of people who are like me before I was 30 and I started doing this work, I was reacting to, crap from 1st grade and things like that, where you're not good enough. So you end up running away from failure and never wanting to look like you're weak, never admitting that you would make a mistake. And that leads to procrastination. It leads to dysfunctional behavior at work and in relationships, but you don't know it. You don't see it. It's totally invisible. And what it is, we make up crappy stories in our minds to explain our feelings. And we think our thoughts, our stories cause the feelings. The feelings were there first. And because I'm lucky enough to have a couple of neuroscientists working for me, and I've spent 4 months of my life with electrodes on my head, I can tell you flat out, the feeling happens, then the story. And that is how it is. And we're not taught that in school. We're not taught that at Wharton. So then you're sitting in a boardroom, you're sitting in a meeting, or you're sitting on a podcast and someone says something and they say, Dave Asprey is a bad man. And you will neurologically and emotionally flip right back to the first time you heard that. And, when you were in 3rd grade and, a playground bully kicked you or whatever. And you don't know that's happening. And you make up a story, but you're like, I feel bad. I'm going to smash that guy, or I'm going to, go hide in the closet or whatever the hell. All that stuff is going on. And the people who made it into game changers, Jack Canfield, I've got an interview with Tim Ferriss in here, just some people who've done really big things. They have either figured that out, or some of them have figured out enough and they're still dealing with it every day and they're in pain because of it, but they're at least aware enough to go, I'm working on it. I'm taking psychedelics, and there's a bunch
MDMA therapy and
there's a bunch of game changers about LSD and about my own path with ayahuasca 25 years ago in South America with a shaman, and saying when and how should you do this or should you not do it, and what are the techniques if you don't want to go down that path, because there's some legal risk there. And I would say for people listening who are thinking about that, ketamine is 100% legal and you can get it from a doctor, and it has very similar effects to MDMA and these other things. So if you're dealing with trauma and anxiety and depression and things like that, ketamine is a much lower risk thing to try under a physician's supervision.
Of course. Tell me about 40 Years of Zen, because I know you have Bulletproof Labs. You have not just now coffee shops and products and blogs and books, but you're also doing this 40 Years of Zen program. Our mutual friend, Stephan Spencer, was raving to me about this program. I'm sure people want to hear more about that as well.
All right, let's talk about it. When I started Bulletproof, it was just a blog. It was called The Bulletproof Executive. I didn't do anything to make it into a company. It was something I was going to do under the nonprofit anti-aging group, but nonprofits move very slowly and I don't move slowly. So I said, all right, I'll start this as a personal blog. I'll just, whatever. I already have a job, in Silicon Valley, and I've got my stock options and $250,000 a year salary, and I'm a VP. Like I have young kids. Starting a company is a terrible idea. So I started saying, what if I could get coffee that didn't cause a crash? Like, what if I did the lab testing? What if I did this brain octane thing? What if I did collagen? And I started making products, and eventually it turned into a company, which is really fun. I started writing the books, and I'm loving all of that. But there's other things that don't fit into that bucket of, food and supplements and things like that. And one of them was, I bought my first EEG machine in 1997, and I've been doing EEG since then. And I remember my first session, I walked into the office when it was very primitive. And this little 8, 10-year-old runs in, looks at me, runs in a circle around me, goes, ah, and doesn't stop. Like 40 circles around me screaming, clearly an autistic kid. At the time, I didn't really know that. I was kind of like, this is really not something I want to do. And 6 weeks later, I walk into that same office and I see the kid in the waiting room and I'm about to go hide. And he walks up and he goes, hi, my name is Bobby. And I'm like, oh my God, look at the change. So that was what inspired me to go buy my machine. And after a couple of years, I realized doing brain surgery on yourself is a bad idea. So I started working with neuroscientists and people doing neurofeedback. And you fast forward 20 years later, I used to bring clients through actually a couple different centers on ways of working with partners on doing neurofeedback for executives in a very different way. That the normal thing is you go in for an hour, you sit there, 10 sessions, you're there, now you're upgraded. We're talking 10 hours a day, personal development, leaders in the room. You're actually doing a meditation practice with feedback, and you do it for 5 days straight. And about 3 years ago, I said, all right, I'm very limited with the partners I'm working with because of older technologies in that whole industry and just practices that were not as effective as I wanted. So I opened a $2.5 million facility with 2 neuroscientists and an executive chef and basically facilitators and a whole staff. So you go there and you spend 5 days where all you do is look at what's going on inside your head for 3 days, and you edit all the patterns that make you respond to the world in ways that are not effective. And then you have 2 days doing specific brain tuning for you, increasing neuron firing speed, increasing voltage in the brain, and a bunch of other techniques that are around just balancing out connectivity across complex networks we couldn't even visualize 10 years ago. And the result is you can get into some of the brain states that advanced Zen masters can get into in 5 days. And some of this is based on the very latest research in the last 5 to 10 years about what do gamma brainwaves do, what do alpha brainwaves do, and where do they happen and when. And we actually developed custom hardware and software to do that. So I'm all in on this stuff, but that isn't exactly collagen protein bars and bulletproof cold brew coffee. So I started this as a facility, and I don't get paid from it. I'm the founder and chairman, but it pays for its own research, and I get to have that gear at home. I get to train my kids with it. I get to train myself with it.
Very, very cool. And in addition to that, there's Labs, which is a workout facility with all kinds of biohacking gear.
Yeah, I kind of look at it almost more as a recovery facility. And what I learned in my path of working out 6 days a week, hour and a half a day, you can be overtrained. Most of our friends, Jonathan, who are entrepreneurs, they don't need more exercise. They need more recovery. And
Yes.
I have learned, and I'm sitting above a $1 million lab. I have all this stuff at home because I travel like a madman, and I have a very intense, cognitive life, and I have young kids and a wife, and I didn't mention my other company, True Dark, that makes the glasses, glasses that actually they're patented and improve deep sleep quality, and we can see changes on an EEG when people wear them and things like that. The yellow glasses you normally see me wearing are there for cognitive function, and all of that stuff is pretty powerful. And what I learned from all this is that you can get more exercise in less time, and technology plays a big role there, because all exercise in all of human history has pretty much been running away from tigers or picking up rocks. Like there's nothing else. It's cardio, and it's always gravity based, and it's always stupid. So we can do 2.5 hours of cardio in 21 minutes on one of the pieces of equipment we have. And you could say that's not possible. Okay, it's not possible. Then don't do it. It's all right. What I'm talking about there is we can get a lactic acid signal into the brain to make the brain think you exercise 2.5 hours, at the same time getting more oxygen into the brain and organs than you would get from running a marathon. Because when you exercise, all of the blood goes to your skin to cool you down. Well, when you're exercising with ice and compression, different things happen. Mother Nature doesn't let you exercise with ice and compression, but we do at Upgrade Labs. And modulating the light frequencies that go into the body, and cryotherapy, and all these different technologies. So they're there for recovery. So most people need to come in and recover faster, and we'll do that, including intravenous nutrients, things like that. Or if they come in and say, I want to put on muscle, hey, this kind of technology puts muscle on 3 times faster than picking up rocks and heavy things. Which do you want to do? The idea behind all of this stuff, there's an ROI for everything you do. And the return on investment, the investment is time and energy. Right? So if it takes a huge amount of just effort and a huge amount of time, that's the worst. It's a very large investment. I want things to take less time and less effort. And if it takes a lot of effort, I want it to be a 20 seconds of effort, not a 20 minutes of effort. Because I can put that effort into building my company, into spending quality time with my family, into being of service. I could put it into something that didn't have a high return. So Upgrade Labs is just about giving you the highest possible return on every minute you spend recovering or every minute you spend stimulating cardio or muscles or whatever else you want to do.
I like that, because one of the things I've always wanted to ask you is, I see that there's kind of 2 movements in health. And one of them is, like, you put it very eloquently, like, do what a caveman did. Let's just go back to 1 million years ago, before all these different changes and all the gluten and all this artificial light. And the other one is like where I see you sitting, which is, okay, we have the artificial light. We have all this shit in our diets. Let's develop a way to get past that to the next step. I mean, what's your thinking on the whole paleo or functional fitness or all these things that are go back instead of forward?
A long time ago on Paleo Hacks, this has to be 8 years ago or something, I got into some debate with someone about this, biohacking versus paleo. And there's no verses there. I was just looking at paleo as one of the different techniques or approaches you could take towards controlling the environment around you so that your body does what you want it to do. And I said, look, full respect for what you're doing here, but as you're living in your cave, me and my army of biohackers, we're coming with lasers. And you don't have lasers because you're stuck in the cave mentality. So maybe we could use all of these amazing tools that we've invented over the last 1,000 years of technology development in order to overcome some of the problems we have. And then you get these crazy people who say, oh, I like to get all of my nutrients from my food. I'm like, oh, then you must like to get all of your toxins from Mother Nature too, right? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, look, if we evolved in perfect harmony, we only got toxins from Mother Nature, but we have all sorts of stuff in our environment that we did not evolve to handle. So when you take supplements like we make a glutathione, a dry liposomal glutathione, you can take in a pill instead of the stuff that tastes nasty under your tongue that we used to make. And raising levels of that, you probably wouldn't have to do that if you were a caveman. But since I actually flew to New York and back twice in the last month, I'm pretty sure that I wanted that in my body. It is not paleo in any way, shape, or form. It's more functional medicine than anything else. But here's the deal. We use technology and we get enormous benefits from technology. Like the entire history of human progress is littered with us willing to make sacrifices to save time. Like, did you know there were trade wars over baking powder? Do you know how much time? I mean, yeah, well, baking powder saved women like thousands of years, like human lifetimes, because they didn't have to sit around waiting for bread to rise anymore when baking powder came out. So the companies did this, got in big wrestling matches and huge fights. Wow. That's just labor saving stuff. We're just dealing with that now, but there is a side effect. So you could say, I'm going to not use any technology and live in a cave, or I'm going to use the technology, look at the systemic risk and reward, choose the stuff that works, and then intelligently counterbalance whatever problems happen. That's the history of human progress. That's what you do in biohacking. I have a cell phone. I use a cell phone. Guess what? Cell phone EMFs are bad for your mitochondria. And I wrote about that in my last book. I don't think there's much about that in Game Changers. I didn't put too much in there. I did put some new sleep hacks that I've never published before are in Game Changers, but the EMF stuff.
Looking forward to those. I've got the galley right here.
Nice.
From your publicist. So I'm looking forward. I always have a rule never to read the book before the interview, because then I don't ask the hard questions, but I'm really looking forward to reading this one.
That's an interesting rule. I don't think I'm going to take it.
You always read the book before?
Oh, I wouldn't say always, but I do my best. Where's it going with EMF? So on cell phones, okay, I could say I'm not going to use it anymore, or I could say, let me move it away from my junk. And so that's what I did. I used to keep it in my front pocket, and I put it in a hip pocket or on my right femur. And when I did a high density or high resolution DEXA scan, there's 10% less bone density right where my phone sits. like, damn it.
No.
I have very dense bones because of the training I do, but it was having an effect. So I, I,
Wow.
I could have just taken my cell phone and tossed it and been like, we live in a blue lit microwaved world and we're all going to die. But come on, the stress from that is actually going to kill you more than that stuff probably is. So what do? I sewed EMF blocking fabric into the pocket on my pants. So now I have biohacker pants that actually look like normal pants, because they just have, $10 worth of silver fiber sewn into them. And
Smart.
I keep my phone on airplane mode when I'm not really going to use it. So I minimize my risk and I maximize the benefits of having a cell phone, which are really, really big. And you can do this with your food. You can do this with light. I don't have LED lights in my house. They're bad for you. Do I have my True Dark glasses? Yes. And I wear them indoors because my brain works really well. And I can be in an illuminated indoor place. It's pretty nice. Otherwise I have to have torches, right? Like, let's take advantage of this amazing world we've created and just understand, if your body doesn't like the world, then modify the inputs to the body. It's not that hard.
I love that. And you mentioned something really interesting, which is bone density testing. And that reminded me, I've always wanted to ask you, I asked you a little bit about it at Genius Network, but what kind of testing do you do on a regular basis? Because the levels that you're talking about of performance, mitochondria, knowing gene expression, all these things, you must be doing a ton of testing. So what kind of testing do you do? What kind of testing do you advise the average mere mortal does?
Testing is expensive and inconvenient. There's no way around it. It's much less inconvenient than it used to be. I started a lab testing company in 2008 with my wife, one of the first at-home lab testing companies for specific immune stuff, and learned so much about how broken the industry is. What I recommend is, for baseline testing, is inflammation markers. That's the most important thing you can do. C-reactive protein, homocysteine, and LP-PLA2. And if any of those is high, then you have an issue. And the issue could be what you're eating. If you're eating grains and things like that, well, maybe we'll do that. It could be something you're allergic to. You might want to look at nightshades or eggs or other things like that, or get a Cyrex test, which can tell you some good food allergies. And from there, most people really ought to get a full hormone panel, no matter their age. Because if you do this when you're 26, maybe those are the levels you want to be targeting when you're 46 and 106. Right. And if you're 40 and your DHEA is through the floor and your testosterone levels are down a little bit and your estrogen levels are up, you might want to know that so you can fix it. When I was 26, I had more estrogen than my mom. I had almost undetectable thyroid and very low testosterone. And yeah, that'll make you not feel so good, right?
Yeah. I know. I know all too well.
So those are the big tests. The other one I'd have to recommend is the Viome test. And BIOME. You want to know what's going on with your gut bacteria? That was the biggest challenge for me to hack in my own health. I was on antibiotics for 15 years every month because of chronic sinus infections and strep throat, because I lived in a toxic mold house. And that sets off sinus infections, and you're never well. Well, after wrecking my gut bacteria like that, you can actually see what's growing, what's not growing, and you can also see what they're metabolizing from your food, and you can make shifts in your diet in order to increase the kinds of short chain fatty acid producing things that you want. And I have a pretty darn epic microbiome now because I measure that and I tweak it. So I'd start out with those inflammation, hormones, and what's going on in your gut bacteria.
Those are really, really great.
And
Dave,
by the way,
I know you're...
if you're not working with Viome, I just remembered this. If you use Bulletproof, the code when you check out, I think they'll still send you a copy of my last book as part of the deal, but you have to check. So
perfect. We'll put that in the show notes for everyone to check out. I know you are busy and in the middle of a launch. I heard a small rumor that you have another book. Maybe you could tell us just a little bit about that one coming out December 4th.
This little rumor about this book called Game Changers.
Right.
This was really 5 years in the making. And I figured out to listen to all 500 episodes of Bulletproof Radio. If you listen 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, full-time job, it's going to take you 3 months to go through that, and then take notes and try and do it. Well, I went through and spent more time than that, not just doing the interviews, the prep work, but then analyzing the transcripts and working with a statistician to figure this out. Because what I would hate to do is have everyone say, oh, Dave does it, so I'm going to do it. Here's the deal. I'm 6'4". I have a history of autoimmune disease. I used to be obese, and I travel more than humans really should. And I do other things. So please don't act like you're me. And if I acted like you, I would probably be unwell. So there's fine levels of custom tuning. If you have a Tesla, don't treat it like a Ferrari. You won't like what happens when you put the gas in it, right? So, you know what I mean? There is a customization here. But I felt the imperative for my own life to figure out what's going on inside the heads and what's going on inside the practices and the habits of the people who've done really big things, so that I can learn from them instead of just making all the mistakes for myself. And what came out of that was 46 laws for people to perform better. And one of the things that I think is most important is that each of the laws has a set of work activities at the end of it. So you can go through and go, this one actually resonates. I really want to work on that. Here's the 5 questions I need to answer. Here's the activities I'm going to do. Here's the decisions to make right now, so you can get started on it. And so it's very actionable, and it is necessary if you're a biohacker and you want to perform at very high levels. This is that combination of where do I put my effort and what's going on in the cognitive and spiritual and performance enhancement ways that I think there's great merit. There's also 4 laws in here about sex, and we don't have time to talk about it on your show, but there is such a thing as an orgasm hangover, and I show you the data and tell you what to do about it.
I was going to ask about chapter 6, sex is an altered state. It was hard not to, I actually broke my rule a little bit and started diving into the first couple of chapters today. This book looks like it's a hell of a read, so I'm really looking forward to reading it. And people can get that everywhere books are sold, right?
Absolutely. In fact, if you just go over to pick it up, or go to Amazon and order it, you can pick it up right now. And if you go to aspreygamechangers.com, there's also a bunch of prizes, including we're giving away $100,000 worth of stem cells.
Wow,
some pretty epic stuff. So
really cool.
That'll get your attention. Yeah.
Dave Asprey, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I want to thank you, but first I want to ask you the question that we ask at the end of every show. Maybe we'll do a book when we reach 450 people, which is, if people take just one really big takeaway from hearing from you and learning from you, and they carry that with them for the rest of their lives, what would you hope for that to be?
It's that you're in charge of your biology. It's not in charge of you.
I love it. Dave, like I said, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to chat, and I do hope we keep in touch.
Jonathan, it's been a pleasure. Thanks, man.
Take care, my friend. I hope you learned as much from that episode with Dave as I did. And if you want to learn from other thought leaders and experts, I want to encourage you to check out our all-new Becoming a Superhuman Mastermind, where every single month we interview and bring in a sponsor to lead a 30-day challenge. Challenges include things like improving your willpower, hacking your sleep, redoing your entire workout plan. And these are the best, most knowledgeable thought leaders in the space. We also send out all the gear, swag, books, and products that you need to complete the challenge. Plus, you'll be joined by over 150 people who are highly dedicated, not just to self-improvement, but to holding you accountable and making sure you achieve everything you want. So to go ahead and check that out and join up and try out a month of this mastermind, go ahead and visit the link below. I'll see you in there.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.